like you have a hard time. Two sides of the same coin. You've got your gift. And you've got what it costs. Hard to say for you what that will be.
Queen's Gambit is probably the most sophisticated show I've ever watched. A story about a woman climbing her way to the top against the odds, against the backdrop of chess. But I think that the most interesting part of the show, at least for me, is how it is able to balance its main themes of order and self-destructiveness, which is explored mainly through its main character, Beth. Queen's Gambit is still, in my opinion, one of the most simple ways to write a character arc in just a few episodes, by establishing motifs and symbols that create a prominent theme. In the first episode, Beth is moved to an orphanage after the death of her mother. It's very easily established through the uses of color and other characters that this is a place of order. If you follow the rules, you'll get adopted, but if you don't get anything. The introduction of chaos comes in with Jolene and how Beth starts to stack up pills in high doses. Around the same time, when she's getting used to all these extremes, comes the introduction of chess. This creates a very interesting relationship for Beth, because chess is the perfect middle ground for her. Chess is obviously a very classy game, with many rules and openings and a lot of people dedicating their life to it. But for Beth, when she abuses the tranquilizers, she's able to see a chessboard on the ceiling. So it creates a scenario where, in order to keep doing the thing she loves, she's forced to toggle the line between order and self-destructiveness. And in the first episode, we see what happens when she goes too far onto one side. So in just the first episode, we've been able to establish the main themes and symbols of our character and set up an intriguing conflict for Beth. In the second episode, it's been a whole few years since the whole, getting high on pills thing. And after that, we learned that Beth was forced never to play chess again and to stop abusing the pills. This is when the Weasleys come in to adopt her, and she has to escape her life of order. A life that we've shown that she's been living in for a long time, and we've shown that she's not happy in. After that point in the show, where Beth is unable to make friends and appeal to her new parents, Beth goes back to the thing she loves, chess. But the most notable thing that happens here is around the same time, this is when the pills come back into her life. This resumes the same conflict that we left back in our first episode, because the public admiration and knowledge she's getting creates a layer of order, but also the pills add back in that destructiveness. But this time, she knows how to not slip up and tip the scales. And after Mr. Wheatley leaves, Mrs. Wheatley kind of enables her to keep going with this lifestyle. She takes Beth to chess tournaments and spends a lot on classy hotels and luxury, sure, but she's also her main supplier of pills and is the person who introduces her to alcohol. And it seems like if something major happens in her life, Beth will continue to walk the line of genius and madness, as that one reporter put it. But something does major happen in her life. Mrs. Wheatley dies. And it puts Beth in an interesting position here, because she can either live her life in order, similar to how the Soviets are portrayed in the show, or she can indulge in substance abuse. And with the next scene, it's obvious what she plans to do. But something gets in her way. Beltic. Beltic is someone who's able to keep Beth tethered to reality, and make sure she doesn't go off the deep end. By engaging in a relationship with her and helping her balance chess, Beltic is able to keep Beth on that line without dipping too far on one end. Beltic realizing that Beth is walking on this line is crucial because he doesn't love chess. His life doesn't revolve around chess like Beth's does, and that outside perspective helps him realize that the line that Beth is walking is incredibly dangerous. Beltic is honestly one of my favorite characters, because she doesn't challenge Beth the way that her other opponents do. But he's arguably able to challenge her on so much more of a personal level, and is able to see how the main flaws of Beth can eventually bring her down if she's not careful. Anyway, after that, Beth decides to go off to a tournament where she ends up beating Benny Watts and decides to go live with him and to improve her chess game before she goes and meets the Soviets in France. And here, I think, is a good point to talk about Benny. Benny, from what we've seen, seems like a player that indulges himself in class. He's always talking to people about chess, and Beth even says he's always got a crowd with him. I mean, the man even wore a leather jacket, boots, and a cowboy hat. He obviously wants to make a scene. Not gonna lie, he kind of looks like a 5-year-old cosplaying as a cowboy. Like, genuinely, during the show, that's the only thing my mind can think of whenever he was on screen in that goofy-looking outfit. Anyway, once Beth moves in with Benny, we kind of get a good new look at him. Benny lives in a crappy apartment in New York. He obviously doesn't live a luxurious life. But we learn, along with Beth, that it wasn't Benny's order and class, obviously, that brought him here. If anything, it was his friends and connections to others that allowed him to get to this point. Benny is an example to Beth that you can earn success without having to toggle that line. And by living with Benny and adopting his lifestyle for a while, she starts to try and earn success the way that he does. But when alone in France, Beth indulges in a night of chaos and ends up sleeping with Cleo. And here's where I think I have to give the show some slack because of how Cleo is portrayed. It seems like the show is trying to portray Cleo and Beth's attraction to her as taboo. And I know that the show is a period piece, and at the time, LGBTQ relationships might have seemed unordinary. But I don't know, I don't particularly like the idea of bisexuality being almost glamorized in this version. I don't know, again, I'm not bisexual myself, so if any of you have thoughts about this in the comments, I would love to listen to them. But anyway, I was honestly kind of surprised by this development. I mean, sure, Beth hasn't had a touch of chaos in over a year, but to be honest, it didn't seem like she wanted to go all and have temptation or whatever. She didn't exactly have class in that place either. So, why did she slip up and go back to chaos? Well, this is because Beth hasn't really put in the work herself to get into that point. Throughout the series, she always has one person that she depends on for going off the deep end. And without that person, she isn't able to make that growth herself. She hasn't emotionally grown enough as a character in order to prevent giving into her temptation. So Beth goes back to Kentucky and puts herself in a never-ending destructive cycle. With no one to stop her, she spends her day binge drinking and taking tranquilizers. And then she ends up having to go to a chess tournament and ends up seeing Beltic again. Beltic, at this point, is the only character in the show that's really worried about Beth and wants her to get help. And again, the fact that this is coming from someone who doesn't want to be a famous chess champion is crucial. Beth has lived in a world constantly revolving around chess, and it kind of made her blind to the state that she's in. And the fact that Beltic sees this and tries to help her really shows both what point he and her are in their lives, despite arguably wanting the same thing at one point. Anyway, after that, Jolene comes back and invites Beth to go to Mr. Scheibel's funeral with her. And I think this is a really good point to bring into the series, Jolene, because Jolene is arguably the character that introduced Beth to chaos and drugs by showing her how to take pills late at night. Both Beth and Jolene started out in the same place, which makes her introduction back into the show crucial, because it forces Beth to look back at what happened in her life and finally confront it, something that she's been avoiding. She goes back to Methuen and finally looks at what's happened in her life so she can move forward. One of my favorite scenes here is when Beth goes back into the basement and sees what Mr. Scheibel made of her chess career. And I love this moment here because I think this is the thing that finally gets through to Beth. That despite everything, despite all that has happened, there are people who still care about her. And there are people that are still willing to help her, even if she doesn't realize it. And if she lets those people help her, she doesn't have to battle between two ideals. She can choose a healthier method and still be successful. And this becomes even more clear when Jolene gives her the money she needs. Because, as Jolene clearly stated, yes, Jolene's not her guardian angel. And she was never meant to be. Because Beth doesn't need one person to rely on all the time. She can rely on multiple people. It doesn't just have to be one person. And Beth also realizing this is crucial. And it becomes even more prominent when she goes and battles the Soviets in Russia. And with the help of Benny and his team, she ends up beating them and beating Borgov incidentally too. And now I really want to talk about the end scene here. When Beth is walking through the streets of Moscow and ends up playing a game of chess with another person. What I love about this scene is that Beth is playing in front of a huge crowd. And this isn't exactly irregular during the series. I mean, it's happened a lot. But I think here, it doesn't feel as formal or as critical as the other experiences were. Here, it's just people who have had different experiences in life. It feels like a gathering of people who all love the same thing. It feels like people who've had different experiences in life. But again, they're all here watching a game of chess between two people from two different countries. And I think this really drives home the main theme of this show, which I think is you can earn success, you can earn happiness, and you can do all of that if you let people help you in your life. And anyone's life can be changed by the things you do, even if it's just playing a simple game of chess with them.